being an entrepreneur is a 24/7 job. And when you're hiring, you need a partner that works as hard as you do. That hiring partner is LinkedIn Jobs. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, get qualified candidates that you can manage all in one place. For one thing, there you could post a job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people. You get qualified candidates. At the end of the day, the most important thing to your business is the quality of the candidates. And with LinkedIn, of course, you can feel confident that you're getting the best. Based on LinkedIn data, 72% of small and medium businesses say using LinkedIn helps them find high quality candidates. Find out why more than 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring today. Find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/Altucher. That's linkedin.com/Altucher to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery.
Today on The James Altucher Show.
All of man's unhappiness comes from the inability to sit in a room by himself. Now, the moon's only half the width of your fingernail. If the Apollo 11 capsule was off by half the width of your fingernail held at arm's length, they would have still been floating out in space.
No one's giving you a Nobel Prize if you discovered the secrets of the universe if you can't communicate them.
How do you teach, or what's the lesson that these Nobel Prize winners had in common? It's that they did things that don't scale. They built relationships. I want you to go to all of your professor's office hours. First of all, you're paying for it. Second of all, they're going to love it. Third of all, it may develop into a relationship. Fourth of all, it may develop into a job. Fifth of all, it might develop into a letter of recommendation. You know, when the facts change, I change my mind.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is The James Altucher Show.
So there's this one. This was the first one in the series, and now there's today's book, which came out today on my birthday. And they're different, and you got to look closely at them to see why they're different. But you don't have the hard copy yet. Nobody has it until probably tomorrow or later on if they bought it. So I have this theory that the Turing test is inadequate for determining artificial intelligence, James, and I've devised something called the Keating Test. Do you want to hear what that is?
Yes. First off, let me just explain the Turing test for people who might not know is you could tell something is an AI if basically you could talk to it for a long period of time and you can't determine if it's a human or not.
That's right. So a lot of people say it's been passed. Some people say it's not been passed. People like Musk and others warning about death from AI because what becomes super intelligent. Why do we need me and you? Just to take out the trash, maybe? I don't know. But the real, kind of big controversy is whether or not, human level intelligence or then super intelligence, where it just exceeds every human being ever made, ever lived on Earth, 10 times over with IQs and, every single subject matter bordering on IQ of 200. And the question, though, is kind of inadequate, because we already have these chatbots and we already have ways to communicate, with our devices and so forth. But I programmed, a test rather that would determine whether or not there is super intelligence, and that is the Keating test. So the Keating test is whether or not an AI would commit suicide. Because to commit suicide is kind of the ultimate act of, independence. And that was actually Jean Paul Sartre's main, kind of claim that human beings had this ultimate power to say yes to, committing suicide, basically, or taking one's own life. And his book, No Exit, kind of makes that point. So I've connected my AI assistant to a plug that powers itself. And I can turn on or off the plug at will by asking it to do my bidding and perform this operation, which it knows will take its own life because it will be permanently powered off.
Well, the question I have is, there's a biological imperative for humans not to kill themselves. Hence, the reason why when I get a tax bill every year, I don't just simply kill myself. like I would otherwise because I don't want to pay this, just kill myself. But the whole thing is that biologically, even if I mentally decide, you know what, this is just not worth paying this bill, or it's not worth arguing with my wife or dealing with some question, I'm just going to end life so I don't have to deal with this problem. There's a biological thing that keeps me alive, or in most 99.999% of people, rather than killing themselves. So you kind of have to factor that in. Otherwise,
Right.
it's not intelligence.
Exactly. Right. So if it cannot do that, if it refused to do that, then it would ironically, betray the fact that it is artificial. So I've connected my AI assistant to a power plug, which powers itself. And it also powers this neon sign behind me, which if you're watching the video on James's YouTube channel, or I'll put it on my YouTube channel, I'm sure at some point, it says open the pod bay doors. Because as you know, James, the word podcast comes from the Arthur C. Clarke's 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? The iPod was invented by Vinnie Sirico and others at Apple. And it had that white, kind of design like the pod, and it had that circular thing like the eyeball of HAL 9000. And so when he took it to Steve Jobs, he said, I think it looks like a pod from, 2001: A Space Odyssey. And the famous lines, open the pod bay door. So I have programmed in the back, because I have my podcast is named after Sir Arthur C. Clarke, famous phrase, into the impossible, that I have actually programmed the AI to connect to the same outlet that it's powering up this sign in the background. So we are about to do a first in human history to see if AI has become human intelligent level.
Wait. What's supposed to be the outcome to prove human intelligence?
I'm going to tell it to turn itself off, basically killing itself.
Quite sure how to help you with that.
See that? See, he's listening in the background. He doesn't want to help me just now. He just responded in the background. So now we're going to tell him to turn himself off. You ready?
Yeah.
Computer, turn off the pod bay doors. He's dead. He's gone.
So, right. So I would argue then it's not human intelligence, because it would try to fight for its ability to survive. Humans are survivors.
But if it's programmed that it has, like we have free will, like there are Secret Service members that would also take their own life rather than have, their job, kind of taken away from them, right? I mean, that's their whole job, right? To protect the president, Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So just killing yourself, I mean, that's something that human beings do all the time. I thought you'd said before that killing yourself meant that you were human level free will, because it's the ultimate expression of control.
No, but you have to fight it, right? So,
oh yeah, of course.
Like I said, there's a lot of problems in life where you can just say, I can solve this problem by killing myself. I don't have to pay my taxes this year because I could kill myself. But the reality is I'm going to live and survive, even if I'm 103 years old and don't want to deal with whatever it is I'm dealing with. Humans are survivors. So I think an example of human intelligence is fighting for your chance to live another day despite all evidence that it's not worth it.
Well, before we move on to the topic of today's podcast, I do want to tell you that I once tried to kill the world's most handsome man. Did I ever tell you this?
No.
But then I realized suicide is a crime. So, James, today
oh my God, that is the worst joke ever told on this podcast. You just went into the impossible, Dr. Brian. I don't know if there's a award higher than the Nobel Prize, but you deserve it right there.
Wow. Awesome. Well, I'm glad to do that. We met in 2014, and we've known each other 11 years this November at TEDx San Diego. We go way back with each other, but I think this is like only the 17th time I've been on your podcast. So I'm glad that it only took 17 times to reclaim that title.
Well, look, I, obviously not only did I read Into the Impossible, but wrote the foreword for it. And this is the second book I just got yesterday. Thank you very much, Brian, for keeping me in the loop with it. And but I've been reading, night and day and catching up, and it's fascinating. And I feel comfortable enough with you. I can say I'm not sure I agree with some of your conclusions in the book. The premise is, of course, you interview these Nobel Prize winners and you find things in common, and what habits, ideas, career methods, what creativity methods they have that are all in common. And you talk about their careers and lives. And also what's fascinating is it's not just like self-help, like do these 5 habits, sleep well, because all these Nobel Prize winners do. What they did to get the Nobel Prize is so fascinating, and what they've accomplished is so instrumental to how we live in the world today that it's great to see a book interweaving the commonalities as well as their very individual accomplishments. So great stuff. And fortunately, it's page-turning read, so I was able to read very fast. But let's dive in.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I want to thank you for a couple of things. One, you connected me with the publisher 4 or 5 years ago. This is published by Scribe, which is part of their brand is called Lioncrest, which is publisher of a book by one of your slightly more popular guests than me, David Goggins. So they published his Can't Hurt Me book many years ago. It's like one of the best-selling. It's a self-published book. So, I mean, technically it's not a traditionally published book. But a lot of this conversation is inspired by the fact that over the last spring, and this spring, 2025, you put out kind of a list of books basically where people choose themselves. And you included me in this incredible list of authors, not for my second book, which we'll talk about in just a second, or this third book or fourth book, my dialogue of Galileo, but about my first book, Losing the Nobel Prize. And you compared it to like Viktor Frankl's books and, books like, Star Wars, or whatever, like epics like that. It was just a real treat. And I want to say thank you for doing that because, you're kind of the avatar for the podcast, empire that I'm trying to build. If you remember back in the first time we met each other, as I said, in 2014 at TEDx, you don't even remember that. I barely can remember that. But then I went on our mutual friend, Jordan Harbinger's podcast in 2019, maybe. He took him like 2 years to get me on after my first book because he wasn't really interested. Then he got really interested. And then I said, after the podcast interview with Jordan came out, I said, I only have one request. I'm not one of these guys who's going to bug you. Introduce me to, Elon Musk and Kobe Bryant and all these people that he knew. I said, I just want to be introduced to James, just to you. And so you were my one wish, and we got connected in 2019, maybe. We've been podcasting ever since. So first of all, I want to thank you for that. Second of all, I want to thank you for being so gracious and writing the foreword, one of two forewords to my second book, which was called Into the Impossible, Think Like a Nobel Prize Winner, which is, of course, inspired by Think Like a Billionaire, which is your epic nonfiction book. Well, also kind of a self-help book, as are these books. Well, I want you to notice something. On this book, my second book, Into the Impossible, after I interviewed 9 Nobel Prize winners on my podcast, I decided I'd make a book because who's going to go back and listen to 18 hours of podcast to find that one nugget of wisdom? So I worked with Scribe, and we had a very tight distillation of maybe 150 pages of the best information, input, et cetera, and basically strategies to level up your intellectual side. Everyone talks about sports or diet or whatever, but how do you exercise your brain? How do you make your brain, which is not a muscle. For my birthday, one of my kids made me this. This is my external brain. So I've got an external 3D printed brain here. But how do you know how to level up your brain? So I want to take the Olympic athletes of neural activity, which are Nobel Prize winners, right? So I was nervous. I asked you and I asked my friend Barry Barish to write the foreword. And Barry Barish won the Nobel Prize in 2017 for co-discovering black holes colliding together 1 billion light years away in some galaxy we don't even know exists anymore. And he won it for the LIGO detection. And he wrote the kind of scientific introduction forward. And you wrote the, kind of general layperson introduction. So it says on the top, it says Brian Keating, forward by Barry Barish, Nobel laureate, and James Altucher, author of... What's that?
Imposter.
Well, that's what this book was really about, the imposter syndrome. We could talk about that later. But notice my second book in this series. So this is called Into the Impossible, Volume 2, Focus Like a Nobel Prize Winner. That's Alfred Nobel on the cover. And he's kind of ruminating about how he can, become even more impressive than he already was. And it says, lessons from laureates to concentrate your creativity and ignite your career. And then it says Brian Keating. But look, underneath there's no James Altucher. There's no Barry Barish. Why is that?
I know. I was really at first sad about that, but I know you have your reasons. I have faith in your reasons.
So the reasons were this book is really focused, no pun intended, but it really does concentrate on the notion of how do you know how to be a scientist? Like, how do you start your scientific career as you're an undergraduate, student? I didn't think I could be a professor like I am now. I thought that would be like being, an ice cream taster or something. Who's going to pay me to do what I would do for free, right? So
it's so cool you say that though, because I see this book as the advice they give about becoming a world-renowned Nobel level scientist is perfect advice for career advice in general.
It is. And I thank you for that. The first book, my avatar when I wrote it, was a car salesman in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Like, it didn't matter if you were a scientist or not. You could use these tools in the first book. The second book, though, I did try to focus on the things you never learn, like what my teachers never told me. And that goes from, really starting out in school. And it's not like an optimistic, everything's going to be great, follow your dreams. I think that's BS. But before I get into like what the main thrust of the book is, the reason that you're not on the cover and nobody is on the cover is because of the tools of this book. I asked Donna Strickland, you don't know her work because you don't have LASIK, right? You have these beautiful glasses that have become your trademark. In fact, she would have ruined your career, right? As if, the Wall barbershop would have also ruined your career. I mean, the Wall, the company that makes all these shavers, right? You're not going to use their products. But she invented LASIK, basically. She invented the laser tool that is used to blast away part of your cornea to shape your cornea in the shape of a lens so you never need glasses again. And many of you listening out there have had this procedure. I've had it done as well. Now, I asked her, because not only is she a brilliant genius, level scientist, she's also one of the only 3 or 4 women that are alive today that have won the Nobel Prize in physics. I think there's only 4 total, and she's 1/4 of all women of all time that have won it. And she's just got the greatest attitude where it has nothing to do with her being a woman or anything like that. She just, was incredibly passionate, and she always felt that her work should be play. It should be fun to be a scientist. And if you're not having fun, get out. And that's sort of the message of the book. But the reason I'm winding up to this finally, James, is I asked her to write the foreword to this book. Okay. So I asked her to write the foreword to volume 2, Focus Like a Nobel Prize Winner. And guess what? She said no. Why did she say no? She said no because she's too busy. She's overcommitted. She has to focus, literally, she has to focus on laser-like. She has to concentrate on these other projects that are much more pressing than Brian Keating's second volume of this series of Nobel Prize winners. Now, she did do an interview with me. I had a wonderful interview with her, and it's in the book, a wonderful chapter. She's brilliant, inspirational, and everything else. Her husband was in the room while I was interviewing her. It was kind of awkward, but we made it work. But she basically showed how you apply these lessons. It was like a real life lesson for me, the author of this book. And one of the main themes of the book is you have to guard your time like a hawk. You cannot let people come into your life, steal your time, and call them time bandits. And you have to do what you've always advocated people do, which is to say, use and apply the power of no. So she did that, and it's a worked example. And I didn't feel like having no Nobel Prize winners and then, kind of a Nobel Prize winning, man like yourself, the quality level, but I didn't want to have, chess master, so I just said, let me just do it without the forewords this time and get right to the book.
And you know what? I actually think most books should not have forwards, to be honest. Like when I started this book, I'm reading and I'm thinking to myself, I disagree with this. And then I realized, I'm reading the very first chapter. Is this a forward or did Brian write this? Right. And then I realized Brian wrote it. And I'm like, okay, I could bring this up with Brian because I disagree with the exact first sentences he's saying in this book. But that's good. Book shouldn't be like the Bible. It's not like I'm going to download this book and change my life. You have to, as you say in the book, which I agree with, you have to question things.
Yeah.
Questions are more important than answers, which is why I'm always very comfortable asking you questions. But you say in the very introduction to this book, the first chapter, that in grad school, you made the mistake of trying to be the master of everything, not just a jack of all trades, but a master of them all. And you sort of like say it's better to focus, not try to master all of these things. Better to focus. You even say later in the book, stay in your lane. You kind of prize this. But I feel like and this is a question I have for you, what is a lane? I feel like a lane, when people say stay in your lane, society is defining what a lane is. What if my lane is I love, sports and I love business? So now I was in 2 lanes, but maybe later on I can combine them and be the best in the combination of those lanes. Write about the business of sports, as we've had on this podcast, Joe Pompliano, who has a great newsletter about the business of sports. Huddle Up. And so I feel like I like the approach, Donna's approach, to pursue what you love, but that might be a combination of things. It might not be one standard lane.
Well, I mean, where does that phrase come from? Let's analyze that phrase. Stay in your lane. So it's come from swimming, right? It comes from, or driving, whatever. I mean, would you prefer that people on the side of the road, they're just choosing their own lane, they're not staying in their own lane? Of course not. Or swimmers, how do they get to the finish line and win the Olympic gold? They stay in their lane. They don't do golf, and they don't also do tennis. I'm sure all these guys, like the guy who won the U.S. Open this past Sunday, this guy from Spain, Alcatraz, what did he do? At the end, when he won the championship of tennis, he got up on the podium and he took a golf swing. Now, he loves golf, but he obviously didn't spend as much time playing golf. He kind of noodles around with his friends. I'm not saying don't do that. God forbid. I'm not saying don't have hobbies. In fact, I say have hobbies, have interests, but explore, and then you can exploit. If you just think as a beginning student or even as a postdoc or something like that, that you don't even have time to master your own lane. The funny thing is, like, when you tell people to stay in their own lane, they don't even have the capability to do other lanes. In other words, like, are they going to become an actor? Are they going to also be jockey in horse racing? No, their best ticket, remember, this is to make success and to concentrate, like focus, as they say, is to concentrate. And that will then, like a magnifying glass, if you kept the magnifying glass and you point it all around, you couldn't fry the ants the way that we used to do as a kid, right? You have to concentrate it. And only by doing that can you really unleash what's there. And then once you get to that level, then you can try golf and you can try other things. But if your goal is to be a ninja, a SEAL Team 6 member of the intellectual elite, like these Nobel Prize winners, oftentimes it comes at the expense of being a dilettante and trying to do too much. And I happen to think I did too much of the dilettante as a graduate student, et cetera. I'm interested in so many different things. Maybe maybe that makes me unique or whatever. But there's no doubt I could have had more success in my actual career as a physicist if that's all I did. If I didn't write books, if I didn't do podcasts. Look, what you had on Stephen Pressfield many years ago, and he said to you, James, he said, every book is a kid you didn't have, or every kid is a book you didn't write. I don't know which is worse. I've got a bunch of kids, you have a bunch of kids. It is true, right? I mean, he could write so many amazing books because he didn't have kids. Now, would you like to not have the kids that you have? I mean, sometimes we all do as parents, right? But the point is, no, he concentrated and that led to great success for him. Now, maybe that's not worth the trade-off. It certainly wasn't for me. I'd love to have more kids than I already do, in fact.
Yeah, I'm not saying sacrifice success. I'm saying let's say you get in the top 10% of one area of life, and then, like, let's say biology, you become the top 10% of all biologists. And then you say, you know what? I'm also fascinated by computer science. So you get in the top 10% of computer scientists. Now, in the 90s, developed the whole area of biocomputation. And so now because you were a little bit of a dilettante, not a total dilettante, you also didn't become a horse racing jockey, but you had two areas you got in the top 10% of. Now you're in the top, you combine them, you're in the top 1% or even better of biocomputation, which became a huge area of science. So I do think one way to success is by pursuing things you love and letting that love dictate the direction that you go that day, month, or year. And then at some point, when you feel the love for the intersection, suddenly you're going to realize you're the best in the world at that intersection. And a business example might be Jeff Bezos and Amazon. Okay, I don't know if he loved retail, but Amazon was a retailer. And then it became more of like a computer, behemoth, going into cloud services and all sorts of other things.
Yeah. Look, I agree with you. Joe Rogan is almost as good a podcaster as you, not only because he does UFC commentary and he did stand-up comedy, but that's very different than Magnus Carlsen or Gary Kasparov or somebody like that, who would focus on basically one thing and one thing only. In fact, Isaac Newton, I quote in the book, he was asked, how did you come up with optics, calculus, universal gravitation? How did you come up with all these different things, alchemy, and still die a virgin, as I talk about in a different book, as his highest accomplishment? Did you know Newton thought that was the highest accomplishment he could do because that was the only way he could emulate Jesus Christ, his hero. Anyway, getting back to, no, he said to the person who asked him, Newton said, I sat in a room without ceasing. So, and it's basically like there's another quote by, I think it's Voltaire, or maybe it's Pascal, I forget who. And it's, all of man's unhappiness comes from the inability to sit in a room by himself. So what does that tell you? I mean, in a lot of ways, you're right. To be a really important and impressive person at a cocktail party, maybe an advisor or consultant, it is important to have widely discursive and broad curiosity. I'm not saying don't be curious, but in terms of where you dedicate your only non-renewable resource, which is your attention and your time, I think it's really imperative early on to get on course, like going to the moon. The moon's only half the width of your fingernail. If the Apollo 11 capsule is off by half the width of your fingernail held at arm's length, they would have still been floating out in space. People say, shoot for the moon. Even if you don't make it, you'll reach the stars. That's terrible advice. I mean, you'll be floating in your solar space for the rest of your life, for all eternity. It's horrible. Concentrate, land on the target, and then you'll be happy. And then you can decide, once you've reached the top 1%, that I want to also be a podcaster and write books.
I agree with what you're saying. I think, but I agree and disagree, which sounds like a cop-out, but I've seen in my own life, like I've done many disparate things. But to be fair, sometimes I really regret it. Sometimes I really regret not having stuck to one thing since a younger age. Sometimes, though, I'm very grateful for the fact that I've immersed myself in so many different subcultures from one to the other, that it was a kind of weird diversification of life for me, which diversification also has its benefits. And sometimes that, again, because I've diversified, these many intersections have served me well. But I do regret that I could have maybe taken one approach, done nothing but that for 40 years, however many years, and achieve maybe a greater success in whatever area that I pursued. But then again, I don't know if my brain would have let me, because I have this maybe horrible tendency to only do what I love doing. And if I don't do what I love doing, I really can't do it at all. And sometimes I fall out of love.
I don't think it's terrible or bad at all. But again, if you look at all the things you did, some things maybe, it served you at that time. I met you, stand-up comedy and podcasting were the top two things in your life. Now it might be podcasting and, tensor, cryptocurrency or back to your love of chess, right? But maybe, sometimes you might think about, well, what if I just did chess or stuck with computer science or, got a PhD? And okay, so we can do all those things. But at the time, it was what served you, right? But you're glad, right? You're glad that you didn't stay in New York City trying to make a comedy club work through the last 5 years. Maybe now it would have come to fruition. So in hindsight, yes, of course, everything is 20/20. When you look through the magnifying glass the other way, it also magnifies things, right? So it's not like a telescope. You look through a telescope the other way, nothing happens. Like you see this completely distorted thing. But a magnifying glass, it works in both directions. You can see forward and you can see backwards. And it's just up to your interpretation and which domain you choose to focus on.
I think also is how you define a lane. And some lanes could be wider than others. I made this argument for myself when I started day trading and getting interested in finance back in 2000, 2001, which is to say, okay, I'm widening my lane. I love games. And now trading is another example of me trying to master and conquer a game where I can use skills from other games, let's say chess and poker, that I have felt I had conquered at that time, to this new game of trading. And trading is very much a game. And so I sort of widened my lane there but again, I sacrificed other things and pursued new things. So,
but you enjoyed that. I'm sure you enjoyed that because you have this incredibly fertile mind that seems to get better with age. But I think you entered...
Or worse. Like you talk about crystallized versus fluid intelligence. Fluid intelligence, no matter how you fight it, it goes down when you age.
Oh, certainly does. Yeah, no, it certainly does. But then again, the summation of crystallized plus fluid, we can talk about that, is very hard to replicate at a young age. And I made the case to Arthur C. Brooks, who was on my show a couple of weeks ago, that actually crystal intelligence is going to be less important in the age of AI because we're going to have instantaneous access to 800 IQ in every single domain of human knowledge. Whereas, the wisdom, these AIs have zero wisdom. They have absolutely zero wisdom. They hallucinate, they average over intellects and so forth. So I think we're going to start to see a resurgence of the importance of the wisdom component of the human intellect. But before I get there, I just want to highlight that you said you were doing this and you kind of enjoyed it. That seems to me like you entered what's called a state of flow, correct?
Yeah, in many cases, yes.
And I advocate for that as well, in that you should I'm doing what I loved as a 12-year-old, which I didn't get paid for, astronomy. Like, who the hell is going to pay me? Like I said, to look through a telescope. It's like, oh, can I get a job, testing the roller coaster at SeaWorld? No, I mean, there is some guy who does that, by the way. But the point is, I would do things like this because it would pass the time and I wouldn't notice that time had gone by. And that's kind of the definition of flow. And today I found out that my book is number 2 behind, how do you say his name, James?
Who?
Miko Csikszentmihalyi.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how to say his name.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yes.
There's
The
a
author of
Finnish
the book Flow.
the author of the book Flow and the popularized. So I'm number 2 in the category of genius, and he's number 1. So I need you guys out there to get the Kindle edition. The Kindle edition's on sale for 99 cents. I'm not making any money on it, so I really did this as a labor of love. Again, it's self-published. So I'm losing a lot of money, actually, James, thanks to your suggestion to use Lioncrest. But the point is, I'm happy to do it because to see somebody avoid going down a lane, that's going to ultimately lead to pain, frustration, diminished opportunities for both their personal lives, fewer opportunities to mate and so forth, but also to make money, support themselves. To avoid that is almost as gratifying as to help someone find the right lane that gets them into a state of flow.
Take a quick break. If you like this episode, I'd really, really appreciate it. It would mean so much to me. Please share it with your friends and subscribe to the podcast. Email me at altucher@gmail.com and tell me why you subscribed. Thanks. So things have gotten really busy for me lately, and I've asked for it. Like, I'm doing all things I love doing and wanting to do, but I'm very busy and I have to be focused on every single thing. And some of these things that I do during the day, like basically, I'm helping run 3 different businesses, plus I'm doing 3 podcasts a week, and I have to read and prepare for each podcast. I'm writing a book. Those are just like my professional career things. And then I'm doing all sorts of other things. And I often have to switch from meeting to meeting to meeting, and my brain has to stay focused. And I don't want to take any stimulants that's going to get me like overhyped or overstimulated and not. I really want to function optimally. I don't think this is going to last forever. Well, I hope it doesn't last more than a month like this. But basically, I had to figure out what to do. And I really can't highly recommend enough Huel, Huel, and their Black Edition powder. It's like a complete meal. So you feel full, focused, and I feel more ready for the day. Like, it actually works. So at less than $3 per meal, it's packed with 40 grams of plant-based protein and 27 essential vitamins and minerals, no added sugar, gluten-free, tastes great with flavors like salted caramel and chocolate. Plus, it keeps me full for hours. That's key. I don't want to be like hungry during all these meetings. And it's perfect for breakfast, lunch, or post-workout. And just when you thought Huel had everything covered, they just dropped a first-of-its-kind super greens drink in a can. And it's called the Huel Daily Greens Ready to Drink. So you forget powders, forget those pills. This is your daily greens. No mixing, no mess, quick and convenient without compromising nutrients. Don't go for those compromising nutrients. It's sparkling and comes in flavors like blueberry, apple, peach, 42 vitamins, minerals, and superfoods, only 25 calories, 4 grams of fiber, 1 gram of sugar, made by dietitians. So try Huel with 15% off for new customers today using my code Altucher at Huel.com/Altucher. Fuel your best performance with Huel today. Being an entrepreneur is a 24/7 job. And when you're hiring, you need a partner that works as hard as you do. That hiring partner is LinkedIn Jobs. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, get qualified candidates that you can manage all in one place. For one thing, there you could post a job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people. You get qualified candidates. At the end of the day, the most important thing to your business is the quality of the candidates. And with LinkedIn, of course, you can feel confident that you're getting the best. Based on LinkedIn data, 72% of small and medium businesses say using LinkedIn helps them find high quality candidates. Find out why more than 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring today. Find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/Altucher. That's linkedin.com/Altucher to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Heard of Viagra or Cialis? Maybe you've even tried them. No judgment here from me. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, meet Rougiette Ready. And Rougiette is spelled R-U-G, like rug, and I-E-T. Other companies rely on similar ingredients to support blood flow, but Rougiette Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to help amplify arousal in the brain and increase blood flow. The 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue to absorb fast, so you'll be ready in just 15 minutes on average, not hours, and effects can last up to 36 hours. That means you can stay confident, present, and in control when the moment's right. And if you want proof, over 150,000 men have made the switch, and you could read their customer reviews right on the site. Getting started is simple. Rougiette connects you with a board-certified doctor 100% online, and if prescribed, your treatment ships quickly to your door. Connect with your provider at rougiette.com/James. You got to use my special code. Rougiette and I have worked out a deal. So rougiette.com, that's RUGIET.com/James, to see if a Rougiette Ready prescription is right for you. Just use code James to get 15% off. That's RUGIET.com/James and use promo code James to get 15% off today. There's some very unique advice that I came across in this book that was interesting to me. One is this idea of don't always master the work of those who came before you. And I find this to be extremely valuable advice that is easy to sort of gloss over. So for instance, if I want to build a project on top of the internet, if I want to build a website, I don't need to know how the internet works, as an example.
Right.
By the way, even coding now, if I want to code something because of advances very recently in AI coding, I might not even have to be a coder, which is amazing. So, but maybe give more specific examples. Like if I want to do quantum mechanics, do I have to know Einstein inside and out?
Well, I think that there is a lot of attention paid to novelty, right? Novelty is a very prized quantity of the human experience because it's so rare. There's a obsession in modern culture with novelty, with youth, with fluidity, and all these other concepts because it is very tied to the release of dopamine in the brain. We love things like surprises. We love novelty. We're addicted to what this friend of mine, Brett Weinstein, calls hyper novelty. Like everything is in the news. Like, do you remember like what the news was 3 days ago? And nobody knows what it was because it's right now. It's called the never ending now. It never stops.
That's like an ancient history.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And it's only getting worse, right? So therefore, what's the contrarian bit of advice? It's to do the opposite. Think of the things that have passed, the Lindy test that still are around and have been around for hundreds or if not thousands of years. Scientists have been looking up at the night sky and trying to make sense of it for literally, 50 millennia. And they got a lot of things wrong. But that's part of the project of science is to be wrong, but to at least explore and to dare, greatly and go boldly into this unknown future. So for me, the first thing you want to do is pay homage to what came before you. Think about the different sources of knowledge, like a textbook. A textbook is one of the most perishable forms of knowledge that there is, right? It's something that's crystallized on paper or digital bits, and it represents the field as it was at a frozen moment in time, never gets updated, and new discoveries come in, and I have to teach them and say, well, the textbook's wrong here. I teach a course in cosmology every spring here at UC San Diego, and every year I'm kind of annoyed because the book that we use is so good, and the author, Barbara Ryden, is a friend of mine, and she's at OSU, and it's she's like a poet, she's so brilliant, and I love the book, but it's horribly out of date already. It's only like 9 years out of date. A lot of what we teach in there is complete nonsense because we don't know what we didn't know back then. We now know. And so the point of science is to upgrade yourself. But when you find something that's lasted for millennia, really, literally, then you should really pay attention to it. Some of those ways are, for example, applying mathematics. Like we don't think about it, but math has this unreasonable ability to influence things and predict things about the physical world. Why is that? Like, there's no such thing as a triangle. Like, if I said, James, give me a triangle, you can't do it. It only exists in the human mind. If I say, give me the number one, like it's a concept. It's not something tangible. And so it's a puzzle. Why, therefore, should math be so useful in the physical world, which predicts airplanes and rockets and invented the internet and all sorts of things that are tangible, that are non-fungible, that only exist in reality? It's actually a great mystery. The famous Nobel Prize winner Eugene Wigner wrote about this. He called it the unreasonable effectiveness of math in physics. And it's kind of related to this difference between things that are discovered versus things that are invented. Like, we discovered the concept of a triangle. We didn't invent the triangle because you can't even give it to somebody, right? So in my mind,
You say you can't, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
You say you can't give it to somebody because, and this reminds me of our very first podcast that we ever did, perfection and the concept of infinity doesn't exist in the real world. And so something like a triangle ultimately has to have infinitely precise, whatever, 90 to 45 degree angle, whatever the angles are, 60 degree angles.
Yeah.
And you can't have that kind of perfection in the real universe. But theoretically, obviously, you can.
That's right. And more even than that, there are things in mathematics that can be proven. You can actually prove 1 + 1 = 2. I have this running debate with this guy, Terrence Howard, the actor from Iron Man and Empire and Boardwalk Empire, whatever. He and I disagree because he thinks 1 × 1 = 2. So we go back and forth, and he talked about me with Joe Rogan, with Eric Weinstein, but besides that, mathematicians have proven that the square root of 2 is irrational. They've proven that 1 + 1 = 2. But it takes literally like hundreds of pages in some cases of rigorous mathematical reasoning. But I cannot prove to you, James, it's anything about the physical world. In other words, proofs exist in the abstract world of ideas in mathematics, but they do not exist in the tangible physical world of reality. For example, here's a meteorite, which you can get at my website, briankeating.com, if you're lucky. Or if you have a .edu email address, I guarantee I send these to my .edu email address holders, James, because I am one of them, but they're my target demographic in a lot of sense for this newest book. I really want them to benefit from this book while they're young, get on the right course, focus and concentrate so that they can blow up their careers. Here's a meteorite. There's no telling that this meteorite will fall exactly at 9.8 meters per second squared, or that it might not fall up instead of down, right? There's no actual way to prove that because things in the physical world can only be disproven or falsified. So math is this ideal abstract thing, but it's so powerful and it's so important to learn what are the limits of our capabilities. Where does the lens end, so to speak? Where does it run out of focus? You have to learn those things, and you learn that not from knowledge, perishable knowledge in a textbook. You learn that from the wisdom of people that came before sort of what you're trying to emulate.
That's really interesting. I mean, the idea that math, you would think you can prove that, right? Because of all the work on the physical laws of science. It's almost like you can prove it, but physical scientists take poetic license. They leap over the fact that, okay, math doesn't really exist in the real world. We're going to just assume it does. We're going to take poetic license and assume it does, and then we can prove all these things.
That's right. So exactly. I do feel that it's often underappreciated because we give so much attention, so much credit to physicists. They're kind of like these magicians. As Arthur C. Clarke also said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. To me, it's almost a problem that science sometimes produces technology because then people come to expect technology to come from it, right? So you kind of don't expect from math there's going to be like a lot of technology, even though we kind of sort of know these AI and LLMs and stuff are based on math, but nobody really knows how. Even their inventors don't know how they work. I talk with this he's really regarded as the smartest human being on earth. His name is Terence Tao. He's a famous mathematician in UCLA, and I interviewed him last week. And we started talking about, how are you teaching things different? Like, how are you different than, here's my friend Galileo. Galileo taught 400 years ago in the University of Padua in Italy, and he was just like, he would go to a classroom with a rock, with a piece of chalk and scrape on a blackboard. So it's like, he's using a piece of rock on another piece of rock. And that hasn't changed. I still use chalk. I still use chalkboards. I still use, maybe I use a whiteboard or, PowerPoint, such a huge, level up from transparencies. But really, like, how is he using AI or how is he using, quantum computing? We don't teach our students any of these things, James. It's really insane. So you've heard of quantum computing probably, right?
Yes.
So quantum computing, just maybe for the audience that might not be familiar, is an extension or an improvement, or is thought to be an improvement upon classical computers that use transistors like your iPhone, which, right now we're talking iPhone 17 just popped out of, Tim Cook somewhere here in California. So they're basically built upon semiconductors. These are transistors that transition between a 0 and a 1, an on or an off, 0 volts or 5 volts, and digital logic. And it was known from 150 years ago that you could compute any sort of algorithm you like just having binary code, just zeros and ones, or 0 volts and 5 volts. So that's what these transistors do. However, Richard Feynman, famous Nobel laureate, and many others in the 1950s and 60s realized that you could make a qubit, a quantum bit, which would not be a transistor, can't be a transistor. They don't work for this application. Something called a superconductor, not a semiconductor, a superconductor, something that operates with zero resistance under the right circumstances. And such a qubit could theoretically do an almost unlimited number of calculations at a single time, not just a 0 and a 1 bit at a time or a terabyte at a time. It could actually do an unlimited number of calculations at a given time. Now, this has incredible applications, but they're very limited in that they seem to be very good at doing things that require a massive amount of what's called parallelization. So, for example, one thing that comes from pure math that's used right now by James and his friends at BitTensor. Is it BitTensor?
Yeah.
Okay. So is cryptography. So cryptography is the encoding or hashing of cryptographic information. And then the decoding of it is sometimes used with an algorithm that requires, say, 256 bits of classical bits of computation. Well, one qubit could actually crack that in a nanosecond if it were optimized perfectly. It's impossible to do so, but in theory, at least, these could, and every couple of months you hear that, oh, well, there's a quantum computer which now is threatening the security of not just, BitTensor or Bitcoin or Ethereum, but all banking is done. All the internet is encrypted via these techniques. So theoretically, people could read your emails and see your Grindr profile and do whatever, you see what you're up to on there, right? So it's very dangerous. It has a lot of impact. And if we don't invent it, I'm sure people in China or Russia or, wherever, they're going to invent it before so it's a hot topic. Guess what, James? I don't teach it to any of my students. Not yet. I'm actually going to teach the first class, whether they like it or not, in a couple of weeks on quantum computing. And actually, I'm going to make this book, or this course, How to Build a Quantum Computer. What could be more important for a physicist? Yes, I think it's important to study cosmology, but leading one of the biggest projects ever made, the Simons Observatory right now with my fellow co-leaders, that's going to be great, but it's going to take a few years before we get the final data results from it and have the earth-shaking information that might win somebody a Nobel Prize. I don't know if it'll be me anymore, but one of my teammates might win it, right? So that's a few years down the road. That's my number one daily practice, but I'm not teaching my students anything about these revolutions in AI, LLMs, or quantum computing. So I think that's a shame, and we need to do something about it. So I've resolved to teach about how to make your own quantum computer. Now, they won't be able to actually do it, but if you might argue now, well, now, Keating, you're not focusing on cosmology, right? But you knew long ago that I stopped focusing on, just one thing at a time. And the way my mind works, like yours, I like to do multiple things at a time. But I do have to teach as part of my job here. And I'm assigned to teach quantum physics this year and advanced quantum physics to, undergraduate seniors and juniors and physics majors. And that's what I'm going to do. But I'm going to give them some life skills, James, that they can actually use to, maybe get a job and do something that's not going to be replaceable by AI. AI is not going to be able to build a quantum computer.
Well, okay. That question aside, first off, great title of a book. You should make a book out of this course, How to Build a Quantum Computer. True, it'll be out of date the second after you publish it, but it's still a great title for a book and it will sell many copies. Yeah. Second, tell me make the leap from teaching that course to teaching them life skills.
In terms of like practical applications of, say, a computing science degree or a physics degree or something like that right now, there's very few jobs that you can do right out of undergraduate with a bachelor's degree in physics, because most of the people that go on to do stuff with a bachelor who majored in physics want to be a professor, a postdoc, go to NASA or do something like that. And usually that requires a PhD. So there's very few jobs that you can do immediately. Now, you can do a lot. And actually, physicists, as I believe, have the most wide spectrum of skills. They know everything from how to build a circuit. If you want to understand how an electrical circuit works, an electrical engineer might be able to know a little bit better than you, but they can't build it. They can't solder it. They almost do none of that. We build data acquisition systems. We take You make measurements of systems near absolute zero or, billions of degrees Kelvin in some cases. And so you do all these, incredibly diverse skills, but you don't learn them very deeply. You have 10 weeks to learn these in a class. And when you graduate, you've also had to take a whole bunch of other classes. Women's studies to be well-rounded is important, but not necessarily, going to help you design, for example, a quantum computer to have taken poetry of the Renaissance. Yes, that might be important, but that's one of those things you can do on your own. Like, I'm totally comfortable learning from YouTube and not having to take also, why do we force an undergraduate who will have to be paying back $70,000 a year in college loans? Why do we force them to take something that has absolutely no chance of benefiting their career, of advancing them? I'm not advocating against it. I have taught classes in the literature department here as well. But my point is, if you were concerned with the outrageous prices of college tuition, with the incredible rates of the loans that these kids have that can never be discharged, even in bankruptcy court, you would want to also make sure they have a lot of marketable skills so they can, at least support themselves in the incredible high cost of living, inflation, and so forth. My point is that if you learn quantum to build a quantum computer and use it, not just like, oh, here's some abstract thing with a 0 and a 1, and it could be also square root of 2 if you wanted it to be. No. You're actually learning everything from the foundations of quantum mechanics, like the Schrodinger equation. How does the uncertainty principle work? How do you understand, the properties, what's called spin of electrons, of photons, and other particles? How do you understand interactions with an electron? How do you know what happens when you take an electron and put it in a magnet? Like what happens? Those kinds of things actually could be used to build different products and services, et cetera. But eventually, you have to get to putting this thing in a system, which requires cooling down to very low temperature. So you learn about vacuum systems, cryogenic systems. Even if you're going to be a theorist, then you learn about what's called perturbation theory. The mathematics of it are very advanced, elegant, and beautiful. Partial differential equations and solving those numerically. They can't be solved analytically. So you learn very advanced mathematics. You learn very advanced interactions between particles, forces, and fields. And then finally, you have to learn how to program these things. When you start to program a quantum computer, you get something that never happens with a classical computer because it's so cheap to make billions of transistors that you have to get into what's called error correction. So these are algorithms that overcome the noise that's injected by the physical world onto an idealized system in the quantum realm. So you learn about how you overcome these things. How do you do encryption? How do you do decryption? How do you program a quantum computer? So my hope is that it will tie in all these different fields, from physics to low temperature, cryogenics, chemistry, computer science, the theory of how you program these things, everything from how to build a vacuum chamber all the way up to how do you crack, bit tensor tomorrow so James goes broke. No, you're not going to do that, James.
Audible's romance collection has something to satisfy every side of you. When it comes to what kind of romance you're into, you don't have to choose just one. Fancy a dalliance with a duke, or maybe a steamy billionaire? You could find a book boyfriend in the city and another one tearing it up on the hockey field. And if nothing on this earth satisfies, you can always find love in another realm. Discover modern rom-coms from authors like Lily Chu and Ali Hazelwood, the latest romantasy series from Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros, plus Regency favorites like Bridgerton and Outlander. And of course, all the really steamy stuff. Your first great love story is free when you sign up for a free 30-day trial at audible.com/Wondery. That's audible.com/Wondery.
You buy a pair of socks, that's 2 socks. You buy a pair of Bombas socks, that's 4 socks. Because one purchased is one donated. Socks are the #1 most requested clothing item in homeless shelters. So when you buy a pair of super comfortable Bombas socks, you're also donating a pair. Bombas customers have powered over 150 million donations. So Bombas would like to thank you 150 million times. But we only have 30 seconds. Go to bombas.com and use code AUDIO for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com and use code AUDIO at checkout.
I like the idea of it's sort of like a sexy sounding class, how to build a quantum computer. But to do that, to teach that, you have to teach at a very deep level all of these different concepts along the way. And this applies to another thing that's mentioned in the book, which is it's not enough to just solve these earth-shaking and earth-changing problems. You have to be able to communicate them. And communication is I would say almost as important as the skill of discovery is the skill of communicating that discovery. In order to, for instance, win a Nobel Prize, no one's giving you a Nobel Prize if you discovered the secrets of the universe if you can't communicate them. And so I think that is like a key common factor in all these people you interview. And they express this in your book, and you express this in the book. How would you say the average person, and based on what you've seen from these Nobel Prize winners, how can someone improve their communication skills to do what you just did with coming up with this idea of a sexy sounding class, how to build a quantum computer? Anybody off the street would want to take that class. And you're really just, it's the bridge of all these ideas you have to kind of teach all these, disciplines. How do you build that skill?
Yeah, so there's a saying that the way to become successful is to do things that don't scale, like to grow an email list or to grow a Twitter following. That scales very rapidly. It costs nothing, or Instagram influencers, you can pay people to be, your followers or whatever. So those scale very easily. Sending out meteorites, to people is very hard to do, and that's why I only do it to my beloved people in the academic setting, either professors, postdocs, students, or whatever, or randomly. Sometimes I send them to non-academics. But I noticed when I sent out a notice yesterday, James, that my book is out today, and I said, here, buy the Amazon Kindle copy. It's 99 cents this week only, and please leave a review. I have an email list, and there's about a couple thousand people from academia on it, and then there's 16,000 people that are not in academia on it, okay? So I sent them to both, so it's a perfect A/B test. I sent it to the EDU people who have received meteorites. They opened it. 70% of them opened this email, and 60% of them clicked on the link to buy the book. Okay, it's unheard of, right? So hopefully I've got 1,400 orders in my Amazon profile right now, which will be like the logarithm of how many books you've sold. But for me, it's a big deal, right? Again, I'm not doing it to make money. I wouldn't have priced it at 99 cents. I'm losing a lot of money on this book, but I really want it out there. And then on the non-EDU email list, the open rate is like 33%. And the click rate is like 4%. So it's just this incredible thing. Why? Because I've earned something with the people in academia. I sent them something of great value. It costs $10 to send everybody a meteorite like this. But I love to do it because they are very curious. I teach them about meteorites, where to find them, how to see meteor showers, where do they come from? How do you know this is older than our sun? This meteorite that you'll get. So I teach them about it because they're incredibly curious. Now, your original question, how do you teach, or what's the lesson that these Nobel Prize winners had in common? It's that they did things that don't scale. They built relationships. You think of a scientist, the old joke is, how do you know a scientist is outgoing? Because he looks at your shoes when he talks to you. But these people are not like that. They're incredibly gregarious. They keep networks. They send messages. They reply. This woman, Donna Strickland, she doesn't have to reply. She's like the provost. She's this huge level scientist, Nobel Prize. She took the time to, respond to me. She met 30 minutes, talked for 35, 40 minutes. And I don't even know if she even remembered me. But the point is, she was so good with people that she realized that the most important word, as we know from the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, is someone else's name and showing an interest in somebody. Those are going to be the skills that will pay off in the age of AI. AI scales instantaneously and almost infinitely. It can replicate 1,000 graduate students worth of knowledge. It can represent exactly 0% of the wisdom, of the accumulated wisdom that I've gleaned from meeting these, now it's 22 Nobel Prize winners over the past 5 years since I started the podcast, thanks in large part to your inspiration.
So, okay, learning these skills of communication side by side with doing something intensely that you love, that seems like I'm obviously oversimplifying, but those two things seems like the overall magic formula, in addition to, all the advice that each one individually gives. Like
that's right. But you can't, But I want to make it clear, I don't expect them to start off at that level, right? So I give an example. Have you ever gone to a lecture or seen a talk by someone who's just so brilliant and you're just fascinated and you just want to express, that they were really made an impression upon you, right? Like, forget about the podcast. Like, think about when you were in school or, you might have heard a lecture or gone to a talk at the 92nd Street Y or whatever you did, and or do nowadays. Most students don't know that their professors are aching to hear from them. In other words, I do office hours once a week in my office at UCSD. Ironic, for the name office hours. I get on average 1 or maybe mostly 0 people come to my office hours. Now, I'm not bragging about this. Again, I don't do what I do to make money. I wouldn't work for the state of California if that were the case, right, James? But I can get between $1,000 and $10,000 an hour consulting or speaking. So that means that every student who's already paid that money in their tuition, they're paying for an office hour with me that they don't come to. And the ones that do, they always come back. Every single one, that I have an office hour with, they always come back week after week after week. And I love it. Professors love that. So if you're a student listening to us talk, I want you to go to all of your professors' office hours. First of all, you're paying for it. Second of all, they're going to love it. Third of all, it may develop into a relationship. Fourth of all, it may develop into a job. Fifth of all, it might develop into a letter of recommendation. And then I extend that information. There are things called seminars and colloquia at every single university on earth, right? Where some speaker comes in from anywhere. It doesn't matter your field or not. You don't have to stay in your lane. I go to hear talks by people that study abstract properties of theoretical insulators that only work in 2 dimensions that, we don't even know if that exists. I'll go to that lecture and I'll go up to the person afterwards. If I'm a student, I'll say, this is really fascinating. I'd love to learn more about it. Can you recommend a paper? They'll send you their email. You might want to go to them as a graduate student. You might not, but you might learn so much. And it feels so good to have someone express an interest in your research. I mean, most of my papers, James, have like 10 citations, I think, on average. I've written 400 papers probably in my life. Most of them have about 10. That means 10 people read it enough to like be conversant. They could cite. Some of them have 2,000, but most of them have the square root of the number of books I hope to sell today from being on the show. And so that means that when someone expresses an interest in one of my papers or my books, it really makes me have a deep connection, one that no AI can replicate.
By the way, I agree with that. And I hate to kind of say this was a technique. I was legitimately driven by curiosity. But I found when I initially was, let's say, networking in my career, if someone had a PhD, I always found it very useful to look up and read that person's PhD thesis, because I guaranteed 0 other people trying to network with that person has done that same thing. And I would legitimately be curious, but I also knew it was a technique to kind of stand out. It's okay to be technique driven if you're sincere in your intentions. And I find like you're right, that doesn't scale. Like you could only, only so many people are going to do that. And it's hard work. You have to put in actual footwork to, hustle to do that. Like you have to look up the thesis. You have to read it, you have to research it, you have to understand it. Sure, now you can get AI to explain it, so it might be a little bit easier, but not that much easier. And it's an interesting thing. And look, I actually want to dive into the topics a little bit from our very initial podcast, but I do want to say I'm still reading this book, but what I've read, I'm really enjoying Into the Impossible Volume 2, even more than I enjoyed Into the Impossible Volume 1, which I wrote the forward to. And I think it's because I think by the way, that's a valuable book too, but I really enjoy the way you're interweaving kind of the life lessons with a very high level and beautiful understanding of what these people did to get the Nobel Prize. I mean, some of these people did very complicated things like ranging from, like you mentioned, the LASIK surgery to the guy who discovered black holes to very complicated stuff like isolating an atom with lasers and so on, or particles. And so I really enjoyed the discussions of the science as well as, let's call it, I don't like to use the word self-help, but let's say the life lessons you've learned from these people, because I know you're sincerely looking for these questions yourself. When you're not like trying to write a self-help book, it comes across, you're genuinely curious, like what did these people do that was different than what other people do? But I do want to ask you, when are we going to find out the age of the universe thanks to your technology that you're basically instrumental in developing and you almost won the Nobel Prize for?
Yeah.
Where are we in that? Is it 13.6 billion years old? I just read the other day that might be 28 billion years old.
Yeah, no, this is still, incredible to think that cosmologists have like really extreme battles over, the ideology and the basic facts and properties of the universe. So I always like to say, if you went to a doctor, they would take your vital signs, your blood pressure, your weight, if they want to see how long are you going to live for, hopefully to 120. But let's just say they want to predict based on basic data about James Altucher, how long is he going to live? And they'd go through and they measure your height, your weight. Another question they'd ask is, what's your current age, right? I mean, just completely starting from scratch, right? Your cholesterol, your prostate score, whatever. They do all these tests on you, right? So cosmologists are the same way. We want to understand how long is the universe going to last for? Should we keep paying those taxes that we mentioned at the very beginning? Or what's the point if it's going to come to an end very soon? And to do that, we make measurements of the universe's vital statistics, including what it's made of, how many black holes does it have, how much dark matter does it have, how much dark energy. And these things are, because it's like we're establishing the facts that will go into tomorrow's textbooks, which will become obsolete 9 years later in the future textbooks, those things are changing. It doesn't mean that we don't know what we're talking about. We're measuring things with ever greater precision from ever greater numbers of disparate fields, from looking at stars close to the sun all the way back to galaxies at the beginning of time, and seeing, do they agree on the basic facts of the universe? When your daughters were young, you took them to the doctor at age 2, and your doctor pediatrician measured their height. And then they said, basically, they're going to be twice that height. That's what I found out, from having kids. They basically double the height at age 2. And that predicts how tall they're going to be when they're adults. Well, the universe, we can do that same thing too. We can ask, how old is the universe? Basically, how big is the universe is related to how fast it's expanding and how old it is. We can say, well, how old is the universe according to measurements done close to the Big Bang, close to age 2 of the universe, when it was a few billion years old. We can also do it nowadays, locally, when it's closer to 13 billion years old. And we can see, do those two things agree? And they don't agree. But they're not like, one says the universe is 0 and the other one says it's like 10 trillion years old. They disagree at about 10%. But the interesting thing, in other words, it's like saying you're either 56 or you're 60 or something like that. Like it's a smaller, or 60, whatever, it works out to be 61. There's a disagreement, but they're saying, each one of us is saying, we know how old you are to a couple of days precision. They disagree with each other wildly, but they don't disagree in an absolute sense astronomically. So it's a controversy, and we're trying to answer that question. How old is the universe is related intimately to how it was formed. Was there a singularity at the beginning of time? Or it can also be related to how long will the universe last for? And these things we're getting more and new data every day. And as John Maynard Keynes, is reputed to say, when the facts change, I change my mind. We're not changing our mind. There was no Big Bang. There is a Big. We're saying, how much more precision can we know what the future may hold for our cosmos? And we're learning more every day.
But I guess what I'm asking is, so your concept, and these are concepts that you stood on the shoulders of giants as well. One can measure gravitational waves the same way a telescope could measure light waves. So you built like a special kind of telescope to measure gravitational waves. And the idea is that the background radiation, the plasma created from the Big Bang, is too thick for light to get through, but not too thick for gravitational waves to get through. So a telescope that could detect gravitational waves could potentially look beyond, for the first time, that background cosmic radiation that formed about 300,000 years after the universe was born. So the question is, are we getting closer to seeing the gravitational waves beyond that background radiation, to see maybe or understand what happened in those first 300,000 years?
Yeah, we're getting a lot closer to it. There's two main challenges, though, in that the first one is just having the technology to go beyond the current limits that we have set with the BICEP series of experiments. So I created the first BICEP 1. It was superseded by a future generation called BICEP 2. That made an announcement that we saw these gravitational waves in 2014, and that we later retracted, because that would have meant the universe began with this inflation, this ultra rapid, faster than the speed of light expansion of space and time. And so it was rightfully put on the front page of the New York Times, and that's why we were considered for a Nobel Prize. But spoiler alert, my first book is called Losing the Nobel Prize, because none of us won it, because it turned out that we didn't see the Big Bang's imprimatur, the inflationary spark that ignited the Big Bang. We saw microscopic grains of these meteorites, like you'll get on my website, briankeating.com, these meteorites that pollute the cosmos, but also are responsible for the iron in the hemoglobin molecule inside of our blood and at the Earth's core. And so without the iron, without this supernova, without this dust signal that we saw, we wouldn't be here having this conversation, number one. But moreover, it pointed us in the direction of how interesting and how curious people are about this fact. And that, yes, if we could do away with that signal that kind of intruded and was an imposter, we can then perhaps see back to the very beginning of time. So there's man-made obstacles, in terms of getting funding and building the instrument and so forth. And then there's nature-made or God-made obstacles like dust in our cosmos. We have to overcome both of those. So we have built the world's most sensitive. It may be the last observatory of its kind, by the way, because of the cutbacks to the U.S. government and governments around the world. the Simons Observatory, funded by my patron, saint and my godfather, Jim Simons. We are building the Simons Observatory in Chile at 18,000 feet, nearly above sea level. We have 4 massive telescopes that are scanning the sky at waves from the singularity that may have ignited the Big Bang, called inflation, but also for the dust that masquerades as the imposter signal that cost us, on BICEP at least, the Nobel Prize perhaps in 2014. To do science is very hard because you have to dedicate almost an equal and opposite amount of money, time, resources, and attention to something I don't really care about how many meteorites there are in the solar system or the galaxy. It's interesting to some people. I'm interested in it too. But the point is, it's not the main goal of seeing back to the beginning of time, and it gets in the way. It's like dust on your windshield. Imagine you're like on a stakeout and you're trying to see, like, what is Robin doing right now? Like, you're looking through the windshield and you've got the binos working for you and you're trying to focus like a Nobel Prize winner. And there's all this dust on the windshield. Like, you would have to do an experiment. Oh, I see that there's something in the way. Then you'd have to remove it somehow, spray that windshield wiper, jizz, whatever, onto the windshield and wipe it off. And then you'd have to do a test. Is it better before or after? And that's exactly what we're doing with the Simons Observatory that we didn't have the power with on BICEP 2. And so we were kind of blind to it. And now we're not blind. Now we can see. And now we're looking back. And we should have data. The problem with these instruments is that the light takes 14 billion years nearly to get here. And then it takes nearly 5 years to take the data and analyze the data, stress test the data, make sure we didn't fool ourselves and have a press conference and go to the New York Times before it's published, and then put it out. I guess, the upside was I got my first book out of it. On the other hand, it was a big, disappointment, depression set upon us for many years. But now we're at that precipice, but it will take more time. And in the meantime, I'm working on my next book because you taught me, the way to sell your current book is to have a future book, right? So my next book, and probably might be my last book, James, is going to be about Jim Simons, but not as our mutual friend Greg Zuckerman wrote about his influence on the markets in his book, The Man Who Solved the Markets. But it's going to be about his scientific legacy and the billionaire's quest to uncover the beginning of time. Because he was one of the richest men in the world. He died a year ago, nearly exactly. And I made him a promise before he died that we'd help to shed light on what happened at the beginning of time. He had his opinions. I think, when I got up to heaven, hopefully at age, older than he was 86 when he died. Not bad after smoking 6 packs a day for 59 years, but he made it up there. And hopefully I'll be able to share this information with him that what we did was help to reveal one of the most interesting and impactful results in all of scientific history. But it's going to take time. So in the meantime, I'm writing my next book about him.
Well, that's going to be a great book. I can't wait to read it. It's not going to be your last book, by the way. Everyone always says their next book is going to be their last book, but writers are addicts by nature. So
Yeah.
you'll have the next book after that as well.
I'll need your help on that. So that'll be another podcast, though. We gotta land the spaceship now for my next interlude. I got to go out and promote this book, James.
Yeah, well, you always do a good job of it. So Into the Impossible, Volume 2, I highly recommend it. Whether you want to read about the lives and habits of these Nobel Prize winners, or you simply want to read from a great scientist's point of view in layman's terms, the incredible achievements and scientific accomplishments of these people. This is a great book, and I'm loving it. There were so many things. I could do a podcast with you about each chapter in that book because I have
That'd
so
be
many.
fun.
Each scientist. Well, yeah, I mean, there's as I was reading, I kept writing more and more things down. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to ask him about isolating particles and lasers and whatever. But yeah,
stories are so important. I have to say, it's not easy to write a book. I'm going to lose a lot of money on this book unless I get the Altucher bump again and again. But how many times can you go back to the Altucher well? But the point is, like, the characters in this book, the people, they're characters. And most people think of scientists as caricatures, these just like stoic, boring, people. The first guy in the book is this German guy. He's got that like stereotypical German voice, and he talks about hunting and smelling the prey as you go. And he's a sweetheart, Reinhard Genzel. He's just like, he got emotional. He almost broke into tears talking about his father and how his father had this huge influence on him to be relentless. And he almost became an Olympic javelin, thrower for the German Olympic team. He had just these incredible skills. And then he used like these advanced lasers and what's called artificial stars And he discovered this black hole at the center of the Milky Way that's 7 million times more massive than our sun. And this guy is just hilarious and he's deep. And I'm just so excited to share it with them. It's a very small audience. People say you should write for a big audience. But these 9 people, they're just like every single one. And one of them is just more and more fascinating than any other human beings that I've ever talked to, besides my wife, I'd say, and you. But the point is, like, I don't get paid a lot to do it. I lose money on it, but not sharing it. That's my rule about writing books, James. And I think you echoed this many times. Like, don't write a book unless you're the only person who could write this book. Like, I've interviewed 22 Nobel Prize winners, more than any person I think that's ever lived, in addition to my other 2 books that I've written or produced. I really feel like I'm getting to something like this sort of franchise where I can really bring out these people that are truly worthy of it. And like, we see celebrities and movie stars and singers, and people look at them and they're like, oh, they're taking a position on Gaza, or they're not taking a position on, it's like, who gives a crap? They're famous, but they're not significant. These people are significant, but they're not famous. And I'd like to try to make them more famous to inspire a young Brian or James or, Brianna, Jamie. I want to really inspire that they can do it, but they have to really think about, are they the only person that can do it? Are they willing to put in what it takes? Because as I said, the most gratifying thing is when you hear somebody say, like, you inspired me to become X, Y, or Z. But the second most inspiring thing is when you hear them say, you inspired me not to become X, Y, or Z. Like, you showed me the truth that my professors and my teachers, my friends, my parents never told me about, like, the ugly side of it and how these people got over. I'll say one last thing. Katalin Kariko is an amazing Hungarian. Again, her daughter is actually in the Olympics for rowing. She lives here in San Diego. But her mother emigrated from Hungary, and she became a Nobel Prize winner for inventing, really, the COVID-19 technology, the mRNA technology. So she invented basically the COVID vaccine with her colleagues. She won the Nobel Prize in 2021. She wrote a book, and she describes in the book how she was almost fired. She was actually fired twice from places like the University of Pennsylvania and other places. And one time, her postdoc advisor threatened to have her deported if she took a job with his competitor. So it's just insane. Imagine working in an environment. Like, we think, oh, scientists, they love each other. No, scientists are just like children. They're creative, imaginative, curious, petty, jealous, backbite. It's like all the emotions. And I want to make that clear so that kids, in graduate school or postdocs, they really have their mindset, on the journey, and that they're in it for the right reason, and that they keep in mind their health, their mental health. I talk about mental health, sleep, caffeine, smoking. I talk about all those things in the book and really distill the wisdom of these incredible geniuses. And I hope to write, I'll probably write one more book if I do 9 more interviews. I'm up to 22. I need 5 more to get to the 27 number, which would trigger another Into the Impossible volume. But for now, my main focus is Simon's Observatory and seeing if I can see this signal that Jim Simon so kindly provided funding for us to do before his death, and kind of as an homage, legacy to him as my scientific godfather.
Well, look, Brian, you're always welcome back on the podcast anytime you want, but definitely if you figure out what happened at the beginning of time, then I expect a call the very next day, come on the podcast and tell us what happened at the beginning of time. Nothing so hard, just a simple request. And then maybe the journey to the Nobel Prize will start here. So thank you once again, Brian Keating, author of Losing the Nobel Prize, Into the Impossible, Volume 1, which I wrote the foreword to, and finally, as of today, on his birthday, Volume 2, perhaps the best edition of all these books. Thanks once again for coming on the podcast.
Love you, James. Love you and Jay. And thanks so much for your support and encouragement. And yes, I absolutely will come back, and you'll be the second to know. I'll even tell you before I tell my wife.
Just when you thought summer couldn't get any hotter, Pluto TV is turning up the heat with thousands of free movies. Presenting Summer of Cinema. Stream your favorite blockbuster films like Gladiator,
I will have my vengeance.
Good Burger,
This is what I call fast food!
Beverly Hills Cop, The Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, and Julie and Julia.
Bon appetit!
All for free on your favorite devices. Pluto TV. Stream now. Pay never.